Welcome, everyone. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. We may still have a few people that are coming in. I'm Mary Beth Stevens, and I'm out here in Seattle, and together with Xander and Linda, both in Florida, and Paul in California, and Paige right now in California too. We started this mental health professional forum for people in helping professions and adjacent professions. And we meet monthly, and we're really delighted to have all of you joining us today. And we have a wonderful topic and presenter today. So I am going to spotlight our Paige. Can you go ahead and spotlight Ryan for us? There we go. Okay, great. So Ryan Nakade is a skilled mediator, conflict resolution practitioner, and a Braver Angels moderator with a deep passion for bridging political divides. He is experienced in grassroots engagement, de-escalation, and dialogue facilitation, and he has a really rare ability to connect and engage with people who otherwise might never enter the bridge building spaces. So Ryan has played a very key role in the Cure Violence Project, a federally funded initiative focused on curbing extremism and political violence. So Ryan built and led an ideologically diverse team of credible messengers, trusted individuals within their respective communities, and taught them de-escalation skills and helped them leverage their relationships to shift hyper-polarizing rhetoric and cultural norms around polarization and violence. Both professionally and personally, Ryan has immersed himself in a wide range of environments, from political protests and school board meetings to churches, gyms, and beyond. He lives in rural Washington, not too far from where I live in Seattle, and he spent much of his time connecting with rural, conservative, working class young men. And I will also say that in addition, Ryan has worked at the national level and recently designed a de-escalation and cultural translations training for all the White House staff that was delivered in this past November. So in just a minute, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan. And I'm also going to just, as we engage in this discussion, just a reminder to all bring our best selves to this conversation and keep in mind that amongst us, we have a mix of both blue leaning and red leaning participants on this call. So welcome everyone and welcome Ryan. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mary Beth. Mary Beth, you have such a wonderful voice for doing intros and just kind of setting the tone. So thank you for that. And thank you everyone for coming. I'm Ryan Nakade, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion we'll be having today, where I'll share a little bit about my work and experience on the Cure Violence Global / Cure PNW project. And then I'd love to hear from you, and we'll open up to dialogue and questions and that kind of thing. So I think to start, I'll just start a little bit by also, I'm getting over a flu, so I apologize if I sound a little congested and have to blow my nose at some point. I have a bunch of tissues right here at my desk. So I have been interested in depolarization and bridging the political divide really since about 2015. And in 2019, I did a basic mediation training at the City of Gresham in Oregon and got some skills and experience being a mediator, and got involved with Braver Angels at that time and a lot of other kind of like civic involvement, civic engagement, bridge building, dialogue-y kind of nonprofit government stuff. And started seeing a pattern that kind of left me feeling a little unfulfilled. And that was that these groups tend to self-select, as everyone knows, for a certain type of audience. People who are not radical, people who tend to skew a little bit older, and people who oftentimes are not really part of the problem. I mean, sometimes people are, but a lot of times people who are attracted to bridge building efforts already have a disposition towards curiosity, open-mindedness, dialogue, depolarization. And I thought, where are all the people who are throwing bricks through windows and waving guns at people and doing all of the really disturbing kind of things? And how do we get out of our own bridge building bubble and echo chamber and kind of go and reach those people? And I thought, how do we take these skills and take them out into the wild, engage people on their own terms, and fold them into the dialogue and bridge building space and process? And so I said, well, how do I do that? So the first thing I did was I started a secret YouTube channel called the Perspectivepedia. So kind of like the Wikipedia, but of different perspectives or worldviews. And I basically started reaching out to people on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook who were posting the most extreme inflammatory things I could find on both sides. I just DM them, direct message them, and said, "Hey, I saw what you're saying. Do you want to have a Zoom call with me? And I'd love to hear about your worldview and just ask you questions and build a kind of Wikipedia of different perspectives and make sure that I accurately understood what you're saying." And to my surprise, a lot of people got back to me. Very few people on the far left got back to me online, but a lot of people on the far right got back to me. And so I enjoyed having 3-hour, 4-hour recorded Zoom conversations and kind of got comfortable or familiar with how to navigate conversations that are outside of the Overton window or outside of the framework of discourse that we are in as a country, and talk about things like slavery, flat earth, genetic supremacy, wild conspiracies, that kind of thing. And I kind of learned to enjoy it. So the next step was I became interested in protest de-escalation. And so obviously, there was COVID and the George Floyd riots. And then after January 6th, a lot of people were concerned about political violence and social unrest. And so I got involved by going to different protests. I was living in Gresham, Oregon, which is right by Portland, where we had a lot of protests, and got a lot of media attention in 2020 and before that as well. And so I hooked up with some groups that would go to protests as peace teams or peace presences, and they would basically use dialogue skills, lap skills in the Brave Angels context, de-escalation skills, and get people to calm down and talk people down from being violent. And I really enjoyed that. It was kind of like a adrenaline rush, kind of like a form of thrill seeking for me. And from there, I got pulled into this Cure PNW was the name of the project. So the nonprofit that started Cure is called Cure Violence Global, and they're a nonprofit that's based in Chicago. And they started by around the early 2000s addressing community violence and gang violence using what they call a public health approach. So the story of that in a nutshell was started by a physician named Dr. Gary Slutkin, who has a TED Talk on violence as a contagious disease, where violence is a social contagion that spreads in a similar pattern to a biological contagion. So Dr. Slutkin said, if we take some of the tools that are developed in the public health arena and tools we know are helpful to stop things like epidemics like cholera and AIDS and biological and viral contagions, can we copy and paste those tools and use them to stop political violence, hyperpolarization, and the kind of contagious tit for tat dynamics that come with violent behavior? And they did it with gang violence in Chicago and then to Baltimore, and then they did overseas work in Iraq and Honduras, high conflict zones, Mexican drug cartels, all that kind of stuff. And they found it did actually work pretty well. And so Cure PNW, the project in the Pacific Northwest, was to see if the same method would work to stopping political violence and extremism, because we know it works on gang violence and on a couple of streets in inner city, U.S. cities and that kind of thing. Would it working from Portland, Oregon, up to Olympia, Washington? I live in Toledo, so right in the middle of the I-5 corridor. And would the same methods work? And the heart of the method is what they call the credible messenger approach. So credible messengers are basically individuals who have credibility and trust with people in their social circle. So these individuals are identified, hired, so they actually get paid. And their basic job, so in a gang violence context, it would be like, I go to the gas station, play cards with people, hang out, talk about life, whatever. And if someone's about to be violent or someone's about to pull a gun and shoot up the block or whatever, I'll stop them from doing that using my trust and credibility I have with them, combined with de-escalation skills I was trained in. And so the idea is if we can get a bunch of credible messengers who could reach different community niches that might be radicalizing to violence, then we can work with them on the inside on their own terms to shut down and de-escalate potential acts of violence that could spiral into something that no one wants. And so a lot of my journey has been about, well, how do you find these people? How do you reach out? And where do you go and look for these people? So I basically drove up and down, like up to Olympia, down to Portland, everywhere in between, and would basically seek out. So I would go on social media and Facebook and Instagram. I would make a new account. So the algorithm was starting from scratch, right? So that means if I click on one cat video on Instagram, next time I refresh my page, I have nothing but cat videos. So what I did was I made different pages for each ideological category. Okay, far left, far right. I would follow one influencer, then the algorithm would give me all the other ones. Then I would use that to find out where are people having events. Are there political protests? Are there rallies? Are there documented instances of doxing or making someone's private information visible on the internet, or instances of people receiving some kind of threat or harm as it relates to ideology, politics, and uh, polarization that could insinuate violence or something illegal. Then I would basically drive there and talk to people. There would be like protests I went to. There was like school board meetings where people started screaming at each other, right? There were different kind of even if like chill political events, and I would just go there and buy a ticket, $50, whatever, and then just go and hang out with people and drink wine and talk about life or whatever. And so through that, I started kind of getting a sense of like what people, what are the issues, what are people want to talk about, and immediately I noticed a few things. Is one is when I would interact with people like people of Antifa, people on the far right, um, there was a lot more internal diversity to their group than I had assumed beforehand. And what I mean by that is there's something human beings have called outgroup bias, right? So outgroup bias is we think that the groups we're not a part of are totally homogenous and everyone is exactly the same. But our in group is diverse and nuanced, and everyone is a unique individual, right? So that apparently that principle also holds true when it comes to extremism and dealing with extreme groups. And I'll just back up for a second and say I define extremism as a group with an ideology that's based on taking hostile action towards other people as a way to preserve their in-group. So they think things are an existential threat and will take direct hostile action against groups they don't like. So our mantra at Cure PNW is we're interested in changing people's behavior, not be violent, but not change their ideology or their mind. You can believe whatever you want, just don't be violent. That was our baseline. And so I would engage with people and realize that even in a extreme group, so to speak, you had people who were open-minded. You had people who were interested in bridge building. You had people who were interested in dialogue and de-escalation, and who didn't want their side to be violent because they saw that could spiral into something that would be bad for everyone, right? And so in the interest of avoiding mutually assured ideological destruction and physical destruction, there was some interest in this. And I would do different things, like I would go to random locations and set up what we called like an empathy booth or a dialogue booth, where we printed a big poster of a broken American flag from like Kinko's that said like the country is divided or are we headed to civil war? And I had coffee and cookies and a chair, and people would sit down, drink coffee and cookies and eat cookies and talk to me about their opinion. And I would listen to them for hours and then maybe exchange contact info and that kind of thing. And over time, I was able to kind of gather a group of people together. So we had 8 credible messengers. 4 of them were kind of left leaning, 4 of them were right leaning. And they had, through some interesting pathway, a connection to groups that could be seen as extreme. So we had everything from like professional gunsmiths who work a lot with the gun community and kind of orthogonally from there connected with the Proud Boys. We had people who were in the anarchist community in Portland and kind of through that channel connected with Antifa. And we had everything in between. We had trans people, we had conservative Christian pastors, rural, urban, old, young, every generation, every racial group, gender, etc. So we amassed a pretty ideologically and culturally diverse team, and that was needed in order to reach different social enclaves or different social niches that I otherwise would not have had credibility just strolling in there trying to reach on my own. And so that was basically the work. We would have meetings. How are things going in your community? What are escalations you feel like are happening? And we would share, what kind of events were happening. So for example, we went to Portland State University a lot during the Palestinian protest. I think it was May of last year when the whole college protesting got really crazy. And so we were there a lot and talked to a lot of people and trying to de-escalate people. And then we would go to events so like one time we went to a conservative church because Antifa had come and threatened them. Another time we went to an LGBTQ event in Pride Month because a far right group was there. And then we would basically talk to people for hours. And the fun part for me was after talking to people who are yelling at me initially, and I want people to yell at me because I'm not going to react. But if they yell at someone else, they could react. So I would basically go and troll people a little bit, poke the bear, get them to yell at me. then basically do, like a Ali in the jungle rope-a-dope. Like I would just let them yell at me. And then I would ask them questions about themselves, about their lives, about what made them animated about this issue, what made them passionate. Sometimes I would engage in a kind of philosophical discussion with people and try to ask them questions that they hadn't heard before and kind of get them to think about things differently. And the most rewarding part of this is the conversation ending. And, I'm getting yelled at on the sidewalk for 2 hours in the sun or in the rain at Pacific Northwest. And it would end with, hey, this was actually really fun. Do you want to like exchange numbers and go get coffee or like a Hawaiian plate lunch down the street or something? And I'd be like, yeah, let's do it. And then through that, you develop a close relationship with people, and through that conversation and dialogue, people are more likely to open up. You can see how you can support them. If they have a mental health problem, what kind of services can you help connect them with? If they're experiencing loneliness and alienation, can we connect them with other community groups that could serve them? Is there a mentor that we can connect them with who is ideologically and culturally resonant with them? So this is our entire program mission and that kind of thing. And so part of our team of credible messengers, a subset, is what we call frontline practitioners. And this is a term that Pure Violence Global came up with. Frontline practitioners, I basically call, in our context, like undercover social workers. So people who are not necessarily professional or licensed social workers, but people who have the skills and aptitude and disposition to do social worky kinds of things and to do them effectively and to really work with people on a one-on-one basis really deeply around their needs, fears, concerns, trauma, we call them risk factors, right? And this is done through coffee dates, water cooler conversations, after sparring in the MMA gym, in the gun range, in Discord groups on the internet, right? Engaging people on a personal level and kind of working with them in the long term. So this was going beyond hey, don't throw that brick or don't pepper spray someone in the face at the protest. This was, let's really get into your life and talk through what are some of the challenges that you haven't addressed in your own psyche that are now spilling into political violence or hyperpolarizing behavior that we don't want. Um, so yeah, that was a lot of the work that we had done. A couple things I'll share in the interest to Braver Angels crowd. One was as you can imagine, with such an ideologically diverse team, yes, we had conflicts and a lot of challenges, and they are ongoing. And so being able to develop and really enforce ground rules and agreements that everyone had some stake in was really important and something that we had to continually iterate on. So some examples of ground rules we found helpful was if you're in a meeting and you are not a part of a certain group, do not just talk smack about that group. Ask someone in the meeting who is connected to that group who can provide insider insight into what's really going on instead of just speculating and launching a bunch of polarized comments at some imaginative group in your mind. So that was something that was helpful that we had developed. I think that was actually like one of the most important things we talked about, and then focusing a lot on like strategy and practical skills, right? How do we really reach people? How do we get out of our echo chamber and go and meet people where they are? And so I also have a little bit of a background in boxing and MMA and jiu-jitsu. I used to teach boxing in Hawaii. I'm originally from the Big Island. And would go to gyms a lot, and whether they be MMA gyms or boxing gyms, and then even just like the regular, like to work out in rural Washington and stuff. And that was really, I mean, not only fun for me because I get to punch people in the face and be punched in the face, but also because it was a way of engaging with a demographic group that I feel is a very important demographic group, but oftentimes excluded or not explicitly invited to a lot of bridge building events that I was a part of. And I would roughly categorize this demographic as like working class, young working class guys. I mean, because they're talking to them in the sauna. So talking about supplements and Joe Rogan and working out and different kind of jujitsu chokes that I hit the guy in the gym with, that kind of thing. And that was to me a really, really important experience of seeing where and how a lot of bridge building efforts kind of fall short, and the importance of really going to environments where people are naturally want to do things that they are interested in and talking to them on their own terms, asking them questions, listening, right, and vibing at that kind of level. And so let me see if I was going to say anything else. Yeah, that was kind of a high level overview of what I had done, and I'd love to hear people have questions or comments, or if anyone hosting wants to jump in and anything or team me up for something else before throwing it to the audience. But I'm really looking forward to hearing what you all think and have to say. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm gonna step in and just for those of you who are joining us, if you haven't been with us before, uh, if you can do a hand raise there, you should have the raise hand icon down at the bottom of your screen, and I'll just be calling on people to come in. I'm gonna exploit my position and just ask the first question if I could, because we were talking about just briefly before we started opened up the meeting today, about the perception of, because you said you used people that were kind of um, not professional social workers, but served that role with the groups that you were with. I'm wondering what you encountered in terms of perceptions of the mental health profession, if you encountered anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Extreme amounts of distrust. um, I think the people on the far left had a term. I forgot the specific word. It was something like institutionalized something, but
Uh,
enough that there was actually like lingo for the um apparatus, you know, the
mhm,
field of mental health or social work or psychology that they completely distrusted. And the challenge is that, as people assume, and I think assume correctly, there is more of a mental health component when dealing with extremism, when people with dealing with people who could be violent. And there's almost like a weird kind of self-selection vortex where it seems like once a kind of group has some mental health issues, it attracts more people who tend to have mental health issues into that circle.
mhm,
But if you're talking to someone just about their mental health and they seek you out voluntarily, and it's what's the word, reciprocal or consensual or
mhm,
whatever you want to say, you can talk about you know, what's going on in your life, that kind of thing. It gets really hard to sneak that in, so to speak, when you're talking in a political or ideological framework. Because first of all, it feels like, why are you making the conversation about me and not about the topic I want to talk about, right? The second one would be, um, are you insinuating that because of what I believe, I have some kind of mental health problem or mental
mhm.
illness or something, and with the insinuation that if I were to heal from my mental health condition, my ideology would change, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I was like, no, 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 we're not trying to change anyone's ideology. We're just trying to leverage relationships and trust. I don't know if people here know of Daryl Davis. Daryl Davis,
Mhm,
the black jazz musician who talks
mhm.
to KKK members and befriends
Yeah.
them. So he was actually, I was on some panels with him around this project back in 2022, and I really looked to him for a lot of inspiration and as the kind of model of, this is what flowers and friendship and dialogue can do for people. But of course, the paradox, I always say, the paradox of persuasion is you have to let go of persuading people, right? If you try to persuade people, if you try to change their mind, if they try to convert someone, people can sniff that out and sense you're being inauthentic or have an agenda. And so the paradox of true persuasive impact is to let go of the agenda and be authentic, listen, try to really understand where they're coming from, and re-articulate things on their own terms. So my mantra for engaging with people was engage with them on their own terms, on their own turf. I do not expect you to adopt my terms. I do not expect you to come to my turf. I will go to your turf and talk to you on your terms. And sometimes that took a lot of studying and reading a bunch of obscure books on some Antifa or Nazi or whatever, you know, kind of like theory, which I enjoy as a political theory nerd. And that would kind of help me to prepare for the conversation and prepare me to ask questions that would be helpful. But it is difficult to integrate the mental health component with the political or ideological um, you know, frame on it, and try to strike the right balance there. So yeah, there was a lot of distrust, there was a lot of skepticism, which is why the people that we ended up hiring to be the de facto social worky types of people were actually just people who were embedded in those communities, who were
Mhm.
already serving that kind of role, even though they had no formal training or certification or licensing in that field. That makes sense.
Makes sense to me. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Thank
All right,
you.
I'm going to start inviting folks to ask questions. So let me start. Tom, you're the first hand raised that I see. So Tom Zell, go ahead, unmute and go right ahead.
Well, I'm not a mental health professional, and I'm just here really because I saw the announcement of this meeting, and I thought, wow, this is so um, fascinating. I'm involved in Braver Angels, um, and I just love this work, and I wanted to hear somebody who is a real professional at it. So at the moment, I don't have a good question.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank
Tom.
you
No,
for
I
your
appreciate
comment.
that. Thanks for
Yeah, thank you for joining us, Tom. Dave Beatty, I think it is. If you'll unmute, go right ahead.
Hi, I am a student about halfway through a graduate program in counseling. And um, I don't know, like I think that ideology can be just as important to know about and explore as, you know, multiculturalism and race and some of the other identities people hold. I was particularly curious about your experiences with like online like incel communities, and then administratively that I was curious that the kind of resource you said you were building, like the extremism Wikipedia, is that a publicly accessible resource or just something you were doing for yourself?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Dave. And I totally agree about the importance of ideological literacy, or however we want to frame it. So the Perspectivepedia thing was really that. So that was kind of the ambitious goal at the beginning, was to actually have a fully fledged thing that people could reference. The idea of the project was to interview someone, paraphrase and rearticulate everything they shared with me, and then I would do two things. I would rewrite it in a way where the person telling me it agreed with it, so I got their approval, but B, someone who is not part of that group or who did not share that ideology could have a better chance at understanding or empathizing or getting some insight into where they were coming from, instead of just dismissing them as mentally ill, stupid, or crazy. And so it didn't actually turn into like a thing that I seriously, like put up on the internet or something. But excuse me, it was really helpful as a way to start a conversation, because it gave me an excuse to talk to people. My boss, Brent, I've learned so much from him. He's worked in really, really hardcore, dangerous places around the world. He's been to like Honduras and worked with MS-13 and 19th Street and all of these really hardcore, like violent areas. And his mantra is, the entire name of the game is just finding excuses to talk to people and start conversations. That's the entire name of the game. Find an excuse to talk to people, find an excuse to get together and break bread and chat. And whatever excuse, whatever form that takes, it doesn't really matter. Just make it happen. And so the Perspectivepedia was a way of starting a conversation and saying, this is what I'm trying to do, and my intentions are benign. Would you like to go on a date with me, basically? In terms of online communities and specifically incel communities, yeah, we actually had a whole social media monitoring apparatus, and had people on Discord, on Reddit, on Twitter, all the also Telegram was a big one. People in Signal chat groups that were private, and we try, and yeah, it was engaging. It was basically the same thing, right? Because a lot of this stuff does happen online. A lot of people are looking at memes and making memes and participating in subcultures that are very polarizing or can spill over into real world bad stuff. And so it's the same skills. I mean, I don't have any patience for like online communication. I get like really annoyed with people. I can talk to anyone in person or on live on camera, but not on the internet. I just can't do it. I do have some friends who are really good at that, and for some reason thrive when they're behind the keyboard. They're like a keyboard de-escalation warrior, basically. And so I do think that is a really important part of the work. And the whole idea of that was to not only start a text conversation with people that could kind of be a helpful bridge building, de-escalating conversation, but even parlaying that into, hey, do you want to actually hang out or meet up, or meet at a coffee shop or something like that, if the conversation went that way. And that did happen a few times. And so I've met some great people actually through just through the internet, or putting out YouTube videos with certain provocative titles, and got a lot of people who are DMing me wanting to talk and that kind of thing. So I'll say that. The one thing I'll say too, just before I forget, is that a lot of more extreme groups or fringe groups, I'll call them fringe groups, that's more accurate and less judgmental. They're not very into, in my experience, they're not as into policy. So they're not always like news junkies. They're not following, they're not, reading the Washington Post and the New York Times and trying to see what the Trump administration did or what the Biden administration was doing or what the blah, blah, blah policy, healthcare, something, whatever. They're interested in broad brush ideological stuff. So it's much more about the worldview and the deeper philosophical or abstract beliefs that someone has. And so less about policy, more about ideology, right? So thinking about morality, values, different notions around hierarchy, race, anarchy, those kind of topics were more interesting to people. And so a lot of my research and connecting with people was around ideological and political theory kind of stuff. And to an extent, more like cultural issues rather than hard policy or factual issues. So though making a space for those kind of conversations was helpful to attract the kind of crowd that we were trying to interact with, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dave. Beth, if you'd like to go.
So thank you for your presentation. I think it's really fascinating. I'm also interested to know how it is that you're able to remain so calm in those conversations and to not debate, because I know that for myself, I would love to be able to do that. And at the same time, I am someone that I'm a social worker. I've been a therapist for 10 years. And I'm really about marginalized communities and standing up for their rights and standing with them and advocating with them. And so when I hear these, call them fringe or extremist views around marginalized communities, I can't help but get emotional because, these feelings, these beliefs have very real consequences. And so I'm wondering how your process works and how you're able to stay so calm during those conversations.
Great question, Beth. Thank you so much for bringing this up. And yeah, I'm really happy to talk about a little bit about my experience with that. And I can really understand because I hear that quite a bit. And I appreciate the self-awareness around that too, right? Because some people have told me like, I am interested in doing what you're doing, but it's very difficult for me to do that or to really, it's difficult emotionally for people. So I have a couple things I'll say about that. One is a joke, is I grew up in a Buddhist family. My mom was a Buddhist minister. I was forced to meditate from the age of 4 years old. As I like to say, I was traumatized into tranquility. So that is something that I think my nervous system has been kind of primed for since I was younger. The second thing is there's a lot of trainings on kind of like how to stay centered, right? And one thing that's talked a lot about is if you are activated, triggered, upset, reactive, how do you kind of like regulate yourself, right? Self-regulation techniques, self-regulation practices. People here who in the mental health field know a lot more about me than this and can probably provide more insight about what techniques are helpful. I have another question about that though, and this is the inquiry that I've been wanting to start with people, is why were you susceptible to being upset in the first place? And I think for me, what I started to realize is as I continue to desensitize myself and do this work more and more, I call it disposition or posture towards these issues changed. I kind of became much more detached, but could still remain really curious and interested in what people had to say and what they, how they thought about things. And part of that process for me was actually, I tend to be more of an intellectual type of person. And so for me personally, reading books and really studying the theoretical underpinnings of people's ideas was really helpful. And so I actually wrote a Medium article on this. I can share it later, called The Titanium Man. So are people here familiar with the concept of the steel man, like a steel man argument? I'm seeing a lot of nods. So steel man, for people who don't know, is in a debate context, if someone has an argument, you want to repeat or acknowledge the strongest aspects of their argument. Because if you don't do that, you might strawman them or regurgitate kind of the weakest, lamest part of their argument and then misrepresent what they're saying. And then you attack a misrepresentation of what they're saying instead of what they're actually saying and then pretend like you win. That's not really ethical. So steel man is, I'm going to attack, I'm going to argue back against the strongest, most clear version of someone's argument or perspective. Titanium man takes that one step further. And that's, how do I make my opponent's argument better than they made it themselves? I'm actually going to put more research, more data, more interesting philosophical and interpretive slants on it. So I'm actually buffering your argument first, right? It's kind of like you can think of it as kind of Aikido or Jiu-Jitsu kind of a vibe, right? Of kind of taking someone's energy or momentum and then being able to before like that impulse of like, I just want to counter you and shut you down and I'm going to educate you. I'm going to actually not only make space for you to share this, I'm going to actually feed your argument first and see if we can reframe it in a kind of a creative way or an interesting way. And for anyone who uses AI or GPT or Grok or whatever, you can do this by typing in an argument or perspective you don't like. And then what you say to it is come up with use this framework to make this argument stronger, right? So I might say, let's talk about immigration as it intersects with complex adaptive systems and population demography studies and make an anti-immigration argument based on those frameworks. And it will. That's a titanium, right? You're buffering a perspective on something. And so I would basically do that with every single argument or ideology I could think of, and remixed it. And I think of it as kind of like a Rubik's Cube. I'm constantly manipulating the different perspectives around that point of view. And then when you're in a conversation, you're ready with the questions, you've desensitized yourself for it, you're curious, you're interested, and you have the intellectual ammunition to take the conversation in a way that is helpful. The last thing I'll say too, in terms of a conversation technique I found helpful in terms of not only regulating myself, but I don't want to use the word controlling the frame because it sounds a little bit too like I'm controlling, but getting more of a feeling of solidity in the conversation is to tinker with the level of abstraction around about how a claim is articulated. So if someone says, I hate capitalism, right? If you want to get more abstract than capitalism, the word capitalism, you can go up the abstraction ladder to words like economy, to goods and services, to production, to making money. If you want to get more specific and go down the ladder of abstraction, you can think, like, oh, capitalism, like which country, which system, according to what theorists, are we talking like Nordic social democracy? Are we talking about what we have in the United States? Are we talking Asian economies like Singapore and Taiwan? Or, get more specific. And so manipulating the granularity of the conversation allows you to unstuck the conversation if you're not comfortable with the level of abstraction. And so that I say, don't get lost in the weeds and don't get stuck in the clouds, right? If you're lost in the weeds of like, no, this happened on May 17th at 3 p.m., not 4 p.m. Okay, who cares, right? Get more abstract. What is the broader point people are trying to make? What are their values? What are their interests? If you get lost in abstract talking points, no, America is great. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Okay, give me an example. What do you mean by great? What do you mean by it's not, right? So you're constantly moving up and down the ladder, ensuring that you don't get stuck. And that's something I found to be really helpful. Sorry, that was a lot, but thanks for the question.
Very good question. Thank you. Was there a follow-up comment, Beth? Yeah. No. Okay.
No, just
sure.
Thank you.
Okay. John Reed, I think you are the next one up. Go right ahead.
Okay. You hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I am a mental health professional, lots of credentials, lots of years, lots of publications, some of them important. And I have an evaluation. You were fucking awesome, man. And what you're doing is fucking awesome. I am so glad I came today. I am so impressed. So you also stole my thunder, because the first question I was going to ask is if you knew about the black eye interview with the Klan members poking that bear, and you did. But I was obviously thinking of that in terms of your own experience with your ethnic face showing in all these things. So my first question is about that part of you. Second question, more academic. Paige knows I said an article. I wrote an article called Malignant Othering Syndrome. The basic theory is we malignantly other people when we look at them as inferior in order to compensate for our own feelings of inferiority, which are usually unconscious. And I feel like it overlaps enormously with what you're doing, even though you're not naming it that you are moving into people's examination of, why I might feel this need to feel superior to those people. So I would love to hear anything you have to say about that, as also with what responses have you gotten just from your appearance when you start to poke some of these bears?
Thank you, John. Thank you. So the second question, starting first, sir, could you just repeat the second question one more time?
What?
Could you repeat the second question you had?
Oh, the question about malignant othering?
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. So what I was going to say about that was there's a concept that I've been playing around with. I don't know if this is a thing. So if this is a thing, let me know, or anyone here, let me know. I've been using the word ideologization for this phenomenon. So the idea of this phenomena is someone has, and this is kind of a something that is studied in kind of the extremism mental health overlap field. Someone has a bad experience in their life. Maybe they were bullied in school by a racial group that was not theirs, right? Maybe they had some kind of, maybe they were abused by their parents and then needed support from a community structure, and they sought it out in an unwholesome way. Something personal happened to them that we can say is a psychological, biographical, personal thing. But for whatever reason, and not everyone does this, but in extremism, I think this happens a lot. People then ideologize the personal experience. They take something personal and then they slap a political worldview contested set of labels and ideals onto it, and then turn it into an ideology, and then start to reinterpret their experience through an ideological lens instead of a purely psychological or like self-improvement lens. And so what one thing I was tracking when we were having these conversations with these people over the last few years was this process of like de-ideologization or repersonalization. So it's, how does the ideological label kind of slip away, and I can more directly work with my own baggage and take responsibility for that instead of ideologizing it and turning it into some kind of political worldview activist framework that might make you feel good in the short term, but doesn't get to the underlying issue that made you graft onto this idea system in the first place, right? So this idea of de-ideologization and repersonalization is something I'm interested in.
I think it has a lot of overlap with what we're talking about. Is there a way you could post your emails? I'd love to send you this article and get your reaction. Can you put your email in the chat or something like that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, we can send it out.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah. And your first question, just really.
Oh, right. Yeah. There you are, the clan members.
I have not. So I think this is good. This gets really weird. Okay, so is everyone free for a weird conversation? A lot of white supremacists don't have a problem with Asians or even like Asians. Not all of them, but some of them do. And it gets into weird theories about IQ and stuff. But there are notable white supremacists, like I can't remember what his name is. He's an author who wrote a bunch of books that I read. And several of them explicitly say that Asians are like based. So I'm like, okay. If you so actually this was something that was something I would bring up with people, and I actually had a lot of really interesting conversations around it. And so I personally look at like racism as in the kind of work that I do, if someone is going to be racist towards me in a public setting, that's exactly what I want. I'm so happy. I found the person that I need to be talking to. How lucky am I, right? And that means that that person is, if I can talk to that person and befriend them and have a dialogue on where that's coming from, then maybe that person is less likely to take it out on some random hapless bystander, right? If I can absorb the brunt of that, I'm also getting paid to do this, by this. This is actually my like day job, right? So if people want to engage with me on that, I'm more than happy to talk through it and have had a lot of really interesting conversations around why people could have that kind of animosity. So yeah, I'm here for it.
Cool. All right. Thank you, John, for the question. Ryan, thank you. Xander, I saw you next up.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Ryan. That was really great. And thank you for mentioning Daryl Davis. I've had the privilege and honor of working with him for the last 3.5, almost 4 years now. One of the things that I really love about what Daryl does, and I would imagine that you come from the same perspective because you mentioned him and you talked about how he was an influence on you, is that he separates the ism from the ist, right? Racism from the racist. He doesn't dehumanize people, right? He doesn't fight against the person. He doesn't fight against even the issue, but he gets curious and he engages with the person about their thoughts, their beliefs, where they came from, what are their goals, right? What's the outcome they're seeking? So I like this idea of separating the person from the issue. In negotiation, we'd say separating the person from the problem, right? You separate these things. And there's two things I'm wondering. And so the first is, I'm curious if you're familiar with Andy No. And because, he's also an Asian man in the Pacific Northwest. He's gay, he's a journalist, and was almost beaten to death by the Rose City Antifa chapter there in Portland, Oregon. And so I wonder if there's a difference between how the quote fringe left and the fringe right respond to Asians, in particular, because of I've heard more from the fringe left, so to speak, of more anger towards Asian people. And so if you're having any differences, you mentioned with white supremacists, but I'd love to know how Antifa treats you and those people. And then also this concept of no platforming, right? This idea of I'm not going to talk to you, or I'm not going to talk to somebody who I disagree with, because I don't want to platform their noxious, toxic, intolerant ideas and views. So people will tend to say, no, I'm not going to go to that panel. I'm not going to do that debate. I'm not going to appear on stage with that person, because they don't want to, quote, platform them. And so I'm wondering if you've had any charges levied against you of platforming bad ideas, or contributing to the problem because you actually sit down and talk with individuals that supposedly, one, you shouldn't be talking to, and two, they shouldn't want to talk to you in the first place. So yeah, so the deplatforming issue, and then also maybe why you think there might be a difference between how you're treated versus how Andy No has been treated.
Absolutely. The great questions. Thank you, Xander. I'm gonna forget them, so let me rattle them off. The first one, I think the biggest variable for people of all sides, really, but especially on the left, is more ideologically based, or perceptions of what political view, set of beliefs I'm coming from. And I'm pretty like what's the word? Quiet about my own views. I usually just listen to people and ask them questions, and very, very rarely do people actually ask me questions about myself, which I'm glad that they don't, because I don't want to be like outed or get on people's, bad radar about that kind of thing. And so because they didn't know, Andy No was like a, public figure, right? So people could perceive where he's coming from when he would go on Joe Rogan and talk about his experience and that kind of thing. But because I was a much less like high profile figure and people didn't really know who I was, that actually worked to my advantage, right? I'm just a no name, nobody, random like guy. And so the experience has been with them has been, I'd say, pretty mixed. I mean, it really differs like chapter to chapter. So like even Portland or Vancouver, Washington, there's like big differences in the culture, and some of them are very secretive and very paranoid, and some of them are actually have like active public facing PR campaigns and will show up at the farmers market with their organically grown lettuce that they'll sell you for $3.99. And so, and again, so one more thing I'll say about that too is thinking about what environments are you engaging with people in, right? So sometimes the protest, and that's the thing that gets a lot of attention because it sounds dramatic and dangerous and exciting, and you're de-escalating someone who's about to throw a brick at you or something, right? That is oftentimes also not a good place to talk to people. You can talk to the same person in a completely different context, in a completely different environment. They're going to interact with you and treat you really differently, right? Their nervous system's not activated. They didn't come there wanting a fight. They came there to sell you lettuce, right? Or they came there to do arts and crafts or whatever. So finding kind of like diverse environments to interact with people, I found to be helpful. I tried to use that. My team tried to leverage that to our advantage. The platforming thing. Oh, I mean, I got that accusation my entire life, not even from this work, but just from saying stuff on YouTube, man. I mean, I get accused of that all the time. But my argument for what I'm doing against people who are wanting to shut me down or whatever is, if we're not reaching out and interacting with people, who is? If you're really concerned that this person might launch the next American Civil War and do some crazy thing with a gun, we're not going to go and try to build a relationship and build a bridge and listen and build empathy mutually for each other, then who is going to do that? And a lot of people don't want to do that. I'm like, okay, that's fine, but I am dedicated to trying that. So that's kind of my response to that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that people aren't familiar with Daryl Davis, I go listen to him on a TED Talk, because if he, as a black man, he hadn't engaged over the last 20 or 30 years with KKK members, there wouldn't be close to 200 to 250 of them that have renounced their membership in the KKK or the neo-Nazi movement, and shut down full chapters across the country, right? So he was able to get people to realize they didn't want to participate anymore, right? So being able to set aside whatever it is and actually meet people where they are, which was the foundation of social work as a social worker, right? Meet people where they are, um, and and do the work that you're doing and Daryl's doing and other people are doing, because it works. It brings people back from that ledge. And so I'd say that's the reason to do it, and that's the reason to keep on doing it.
All right.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Xander. Ryan, did you have any other comment?
Only that one man de-radicalized 250 clan members. That's a pretty good return on investment.
Not bad at all. Kelsey, I see you next in line there, so if you'll unmute yourself and go right ahead.
Okay, hi. I'm so glad to be with all of you. I'm Kelsey Blahnik. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and my practice, the Ann Way, focuses on OCD and trauma in Florida, Texas, California, Colorado. And I chose my name, the Ann Way, because I'm really passionate about building psychological flexibility with dialectics and parts work and other tools. And my belief is that psychological rigidity is the greatest threat to global peace. And something that I noticed coming up a lot in myself as well as the people that I work with is that, and this is my therapist voice for a second, is that part of me that says I can't even, like, throwing my arms up, like I can't even engage anymore. I'm so, out of being overwhelmed and burnt out. And I chose this work. I love working with clients that have different ideological backgrounds than me. I love working with couples that are on opposite ends of the political spectrum. I eat it up, as opposed to, I know a lot of people are really trying to lean away from it in our field. And so if even I get to the point when that's a passion of mine, peacemaking is my passion, that's what I do workshops on, then how do you kind of dig deeper in this work? Or how have you maybe seen some other people that you've come up to that have kind of hit a wall and have wanted to avoid? How have you seen people dig deeper and decide, okay, I am going to keep going, I am going to keep having hard conversations, I am going to keep doing this work? Where have you pulled from?
Yeah, thank you, Kelsey. Yeah, that's a good question. I have a mentor who does a lot of like hardcore dialogue, bridge building kind of stuff, and she's a Black woman in Georgia, and she does dialogue format that brings together like Black people and the KKK for like a civil dialogue and that kind of thing. And she makes it go really well. And she always tells me, if you're not doubting yourself constantly about your competence, you're not doing it correctly. Um, you're not trying enough. You're not in the right circles. If you're not constantly questioning yourself, then you might want to try something different. So I always found that to be encouraging, because I think it can be challenging work. I mean, it can definitely lead to burnout. It can be if you don't have a lot of interest in either the person or what they're saying, the curiosity, right, and genuine interest, it can become, as your fuel, it can become really tiring. And so for me personally, I do have a lot of interest in people, and love, try to love everyone, underneath whatever kind of ideological shell they're in. But I also have a lot of interest in their ideas. And for me, that was kind of the thing that the going deeper element was, really understanding the relationship between psychology and ideology and the ideas that they have and how they work together. And there's a lot of debate in the field about, is focusing on ideology a form of window dressing? And is it just a kind of epiphenomenal reflection of some kind of underlying psychological issue? Or does ideologies and ideas actually have causal efficacy or some kind of causal power that is a variable that we should consider? I tend to lean, I can understand both arguments. I lean towards the latter, and would like to see that both not only in the mental health field, but my background in mediation and conflict resolution, I want to see that studied a lot more, because I've seen a lot of mediators who are wonderful mediators who've been doing the work for many years, who are much more skilled than I am in many ways. But once a political thing comes up in the discussion that they don't like or they get triggered by or whatever, then their objectivity and neutrality and skill set completely goes out the window. They're just amygdala hijacked and can't do it. So I think really working on that piece is kind of like what I'm most interested in seeing. I don't know if that got you to what you're saying, but yeah.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing and creating this specific type of environment for mental health providers. I think this is such a great idea. I hope you guys do it again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey. Mark, go right ahead.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ryan. I just have one question. I can see the benefits of engaging clan members or Antifa or whatever, but I was kind of wondering MS-13. It seems like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit around, much lower hanging fruit than engaging a criminal gang. Is there any benefit from that?
From engaging gang or the
Yeah,
ideology?
MS-13, I guess. You had mentioned that somewhere along the line.
Oh, right. Yeah. That was more the international work that Cure Global had did.
Mhm.
And so that was a very different experience because the credible messenger aspect became way more important because literally like if I step onto the wrong block, I'm shot, right? That's not as extreme in the United States with ideological stuff. So that was really like former gang members, current ones who didn't want to see more violence, or people who had their kids who were killed in a shooting 2 years ago and needed to stop it. And so it was a lot of things like practical things like, okay, like maybe we shouldn't get drunk at 2 in the morning, take out Uzis and shoot up the block, right? It's like maybe like let's not start there. In Iraq, it was like a lot of honor killings over things like chickens. Like, oh, you didn't clean the chicken coop, I'm gonna have to cut your head. So it's like, okay, maybe not do that today, right? Let's go get a cheeseburger. Let's like do something else. So it was a much more material, practical, tangible thing. Whereas the work we were doing, I think, was a little bit more subtle, right? I'm not going to get my head cut off if I said the wrong word. Maybe two wrong words, but not one wrong word. So it was a little bit more leeway to do a little bit subtler work, and that could kind of lead into the bridge building stuff. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mark. Ximeng, I hope I pronounced that correctly. If not, my apologies.
Yeah, my name is Su. I come from China 5 years ago. I'm very excited hearing what you shared today, Ryan. Thank you very much. I used to, before I become a therapist, I used to be a journalist. And I think that experience really helped me because I had the opportunity to learn from people's stories from different perspectives. And to understand the complexity of something that is very controversial. But that was also the reason I left journalism, I left media, because media wants to send strong message, but I wanted to share complicated stories. I wanted to show the complexity, but is not attracting, it doesn't trigger people's anxiety and sharing the stories. So that's one of the big reason I left journalism. But I have some comments and a question. One is that I noticed that Ryan, you sometimes you mentioned some neuroscience perspective to understand, like amygdala hijack, like they get into a fight or flight mode. I think is very empowering, very helpful to use the neuroscience perspective to understand the person's behaviors. And I personally, as a therapist, it's helped me understand the client's behaviors. And my question is, I completely agree with you that when we don't have any agenda and we stay open and curious, it opens the dialogue. It opens the, allow the other person to share more about their story and allow us to connect with them. But at the same time, I'm also wondering if there's actually maybe is agenda there. That is what you said, you want to change their behaviors, not the ideology, but change their behaviors. So my question is, how do you find a balance to, help them to create some openness so that they can begin to reflect on their behaviors? I hear you mentioned credible messengers. I assume the trust play a big part.
Mhm.
A lot of times it's not what they say, but who say it. The person already kind of, win it. But I'm also wondering what kind of strategies that you use to create some more openness on, from the other person, in the other person, beyond just validating them and understanding them. Yeah, I don't know if, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. See, that was yeah, great. We could talk about all of those things. Journalism, the race to the bottom of the brainstem phenomena that selects for and uplifts hyperpolarizing content and downplays nuance and complexity,
Can you speak a little slower for me, because
I'm sorry.
I speak English as second language. That
I
help. Thank you.
I apologize. I will try to speak slower. Someone once referred to me as the Asian version of Ben Shapiro. I think when it comes to the could you repeat the second question you had one more time?
Yeah, so the question is, how do you find a balance to,
Right.
Yeah.
So the image I use in my mind is a Venn diagram. So I'm thinking, what are my interests in this conversation? And what are their interests in this conversation? And where the two intersect, that's the sweet spot. And so usually what I think about is, what are people's self-interests? And so a lot of times, if you really get people to think by asking them certain types of questions. So in my field in mediation, we call it conflict coaching and reality testing. So if you have a conflict, or you say, I'm going to go and throw a brick through a window, if I'm like, hey, don't do that, and I don't have credibility with them, they'll be like, F you, I'm going to do it anyway. But if I say, oh, interesting, well, let's think, after the brick goes through the window and the glass is shattered, what do you think will happen next? What do you want to happen next? Right. So you kind of get them to think like, oh, like, what are the ramifications of my actions? What are the implications? Or one question I like to ask people is, well, what is the best case scenario and what is the worst case scenario? Right. So I'm not just saying like, well, what is the worst case scenario? I'm saying, well, let's think about it from both sides, right? But even just that act of activating the prefrontal cortex a little bit more to get people to reflect on things, and that could even ricochet back to them of like, hey, if I do this, the other side gets mad. They know where me and my family live, and maybe they're going to do a drive-by, and I don't want my son to get killed, even though I think F them, right? I don't want my kids to get hurt or to implicate them in this, and therefore I think I'm going to tone it down. So those are the little things. Are what are people's self-interests, and how do we work with people's self-interest on their own terms that lead to beneficial outcomes for everyone, right? It's kind of similar to two examples I give of this. My favorite quote is, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That quote, everyone knows that. So my addition to that is, if the road to hell is paved with good intentions, that means that the road to heaven can be paved with bad intentions. And even if they're purely self-centered motives, can we work with those in a way to create a beneficial outcome for the greater community, right? So it's kind of analogous to Adam Smith's invisible hand in economic theory, where people are pursuing their own self-interests, but their interests are aggregated to an economic system that leads to more efficient economic coordination for everyone, even though no one intended that. It's similar to when James Madison said in the Federalist Papers that only ambition can temper ambition, right? So to design a system with internal checks and balances where people's own ambitions for power act as the constraint on power. That's kind of my framework of how I think about the world. It's kind of a systems thinking approach. And so whenever I work with an individual or group, it's always, what are your self-interests? This is a very community organizing thing as well. And how do I work with those set of self-interests instead of imposing my interest onto you, right? And that's where the dialogue and the collaboration can kind of start.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jennifer, I think you're the next one up.
Hi, everybody. It's good to be here. Thank you, Ryan, and everyone for the conversation. I'm Jennifer Elam, and I am a licensed psychologist in Pennsylvania, where I am right at the moment, but I live in Kentucky and been a part of Brave Angels for the last 6 years. My question, I don't know if I can word it like you can hear it and answer it, but what I'm hearing is a lot of examples of taking personal situations and moving them into ideology or political thinking or systems thinking or something like that, those kinds of things. And I'm wondering, how do you keep your empathy and compassion for the individuals involved when you're moving your thinking away from the individuals. I ask it because I was in a situation where I, along with 5 Black people, were attacked in the name of anti-racism. And I saw it as a situation where these people had taken all connection with us as human beings away and were acting just on what they knew to be ideologically, politically correct. And there was a disconnect. There was a total disconnect. And how would you keep something like that from happening?
Great question. Yeah, thank you. That's $1 million question, Jennifer. And I don't know if I have
I've been struggling with it for 3 years since it happened. I'm like, okay, no.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that happened.
Thank
yeah,
you.
absolutely. I think the thing that gets really the thing that gets really tricky is it goes back to what someone was said earlier, is the danger of a kind of identity, like an overly rigid identity kind of thinking. And what I mean by that is we stop thinking about people's stories or about their personal experiences or about the nuances and complexities that everyone carries with them. And when people are reduced to one label or one framework or one category, then that always leads to some kind of a dehumanizing outcome, right? So my mantra for myself, so I'll give you a story. There were so many events where I was terrified going to I'm like, why am I driving to this? I'm in the car, I'm getting cold feet, like literally cold feet, right? My palms are getting sweaty, my heart rate is increasing. I'm like, am I gonna die? Should I have told my wife that I love her 2 more times before I got in the car? And while I'm in the car driving, hyping myself up, listening to country music like Shell and Luke Combs, I'm also thinking in my head, like, whatever caricature I have of people that I'm forming out of fear is not true. Like, I know that as a fact, that it's just not the reality, that the actual people in the groups are complex individuals, and that they have as complex of a story as I do. And I had to, it's a human instinct to try to box in what you're afraid of or what you don't understand. And I fought that instinct in my mind really, really hard, going to these kind of things. And hopefully when I got there, I would break out of that enough so that people wouldn't sense that I'm pigeonholing them, caricaturing them, etc. Right? People would sense I'm actually interested in really understanding their complexity in its fullness on its own terms. So that's kind of the mental battle I would have, and I still do.
Thank you for that. I know that in 2022, I was asked to be a part of a conversation about the dangers of one story. And it was based on a TED Talk by a Nigerian woman. And the more I thought about it, the more it just seems so true. So I could suddenly see why, if a person embraces anti-racism as race is the only factor we're going to look at here, you get in trouble because it's a dangerous way of thinking because we're all so complex. I keep saying to people, wait a minute, you're putting Barack Obama and those 2 guys that kidnapped my sister at 13 in the same category when you do black and white thinking like this, and I don't know, I get in trouble for that all the time because people don't like to hear that are really into it. And I've been doing racial justice work my whole life, so I'm not I'm not saying it's not important. It's just there's a piece of it out there that is really off base somehow or another, lost off the rails or something. I don't know how to say it, but it's somebody used the term the toxic DEI the other day, and I don't want to spread that one around because DEI is so important. But there is a piece of it that is just, I don't know. I don't know what to say about it, but thank you for thinking about it with me.
Thank you. I'll just say one more thing really quickly on that is there's a book that I personally really liked called The Myth of Left and Right. It was written by 2 brothers, and they have a term that I just love, and it's ideologism. So add it to the list of isms that could be bad, right? So racism, sexism, ideologism is basically racism applied to ideology and politics, right? So if I see you have a MAGA hat or a birdie hat, whatever, I'm going to basically stereotype you, pigeonhole you, caricature you based on one ideological signifying element. And so I think we have to counter ideologism as much as anything else. So just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, being from Kentucky, I can't even tell you how many times it's happened to me. There's a whole group of people that can't say white Appalachian without saying racist on the end. It's like, I can't tell you how many times I've gone through some crazy stuff because of that. And it's one thing one story again, the dangers of one story again.
All right.
Thank
Thank you, Jennifer, very much. Thank you, Ryan. Lisa, I see you up next. Oh, yeah, you need to unmute there if you could.
There we go. Haha. All right. Man, this is, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Ryan. This has been so fascinating. I am not a mental health professional, but I am an interpreter who specializes in working with mental health professionals, and you all are wonderful. I can't say enough. What I was making notes on as I was listening to your presentation here is the language, the terminology that we use to communicate, and I think C. Meng had talked about neuropsychology, and I'm thinking of cognitive linguistics. I'm sorry, I'm nervous. The language surrounding our conversations and our communication with each other getting in the way of understanding and meaning. You hear buzzwords that align with an ideology, and what I recognize is that kind of creates stereotypes and shuts down the conversation and the understanding, and then you can't move forward. And so I'm just wondering thoughts on other people's experiences of social constructs, of the isms that get in the way of communication. And then being able to recognize our own biases and internal triggers, not to overuse a word, but and just seeing people as the others, kind of the dehumanizing of the others through the use of this language, the language and the terminologies. So did we lose Ryan?
He's there.
Okay. Oh, there you are.
I'm
The whole
listening
room
intently.
popped up. Okay. So I don't know if I communicated that very well, but just that person is this group, or just kind of that tribalism and the identity politics that surrounds it that gets in the way. And you see a lot of that coming from, extreme sides. And I mean, okay, I'm not explaining that well. Just how our language gets in the way of understanding each other. Okay, that's all I had to say. I made it more complicated than it had to be.
No, thank you,
It's
Lisa.
because I'm nervous. Next time I'll have it together.
That's what
No
happens
problem.
with language, Lisa.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a huge thing, right? Because it's not only how someone appears, but what I just hear one word that you say, and I have an entire picture painted of you. I'm stereotyping you. I have a huge reaction just because of one buzzword or meme or hashtaggy kind of talking point that you regurgitated. And it is a big problem. I mean, I think the challenge is that how I look at it is that the human brain and mind is very much wired to do that to an extent as a form of social coordination, right? So it's kind of like a way of identifying where you are, and people are so conditioned and habituated in a certain echo chamber these days that we might use very polarizing language that the other side really dislikes and will be reactive towards, but we have no idea that anyone would ever disagree or see things any way other than we do with the words that we choose, because we're in an echo chamber and we don't get that feedback externally, right? So it's becoming more of a problem, I think, as people are siloing themselves, and algorithms are doing that too. And I'll just briefly say a couple things on that. One is to going back to what I was saying, I give workshops on communication, de-escalation stuff, is that's where the level of abstraction becomes important. If the talking point tends to be a vague, like I call them like narrative level talking point, then you want to try to deconstruct it and get more concrete and specific, right? What are the life experiences you have? What are your values or interests? Or what, give me an example of what you mean by that, right? And then the other one is, and I have another workshop I do called, it's a series I call Transformative Dialogue. And the exercise I give in that that's the most fun is take any argument, take any political position that you're most passionate about, pro-life, pro-choice, welfare state, the environment, role of government, whatever, and take a stand on it. Now, I want you to re-articulate what you're going to say using language that that is either not polarizing or that's never even been used before. Can you articulate your something in a truly original way? With the implication being that if you don't, then people will shut down if they just hear you being a talking point regurgitator, right? We have evidence that is true. And so to not become a meme, right? How can you think through and re-articulate what you're saying in a new way? And actually, and this sounds kind of weird when I put it this way, but I do think this happens, is that when you use new language and people's brains start to wrap around words that they haven't heard, especially in a political context, you are actively creating new neural pathways in people's brains, right? It's like, oh, I'm now adapting to a set of ideas that I haven't thought about or I'm not familiar with, and kind of make terms that throw people off deliberately. So one of my favorite one is I dealing with a lot of spaces where it's very blue and there's a lot of discriminatory comments towards conservative. I started talking about ideological microaggressions that kind of threw a wrench in a lot of people's heuristics, right? And so just having things that to change it up and to change up our linguistic ecosystems, I think it's good for everyone's brain once in a while. So we can talk about that for hours, but I know other people have questions. So thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, we've got to see 4 more hands up, and that will probably be all we're going to have time for. So I've got Larry, Paul, Rowan, and Michelle. So Larry, why don't you go ahead?
Yes, hi. Happy New Year, everyone, calendar and lunar, whatever your preference is. Ryan, thank you so much. I want to make the point that this is not a level playing field. There are people paid lots of money to get people angry, and I think first thing we learn in human behavior is the madder you get, the stupider you get. And it's their job to escalate people and rile people up. And right now I'm kind of in the position that once people have gone down the rabbit hole, it's really hard to get them back out. There's a couple of stories who've been people who've gone to prison, and that's what it took. You know, they've lost their families, they've lost things. And I taught in prison, and being in prison is just awful. What I'm hearing from you is that there are some techniques to bring people back out of that rabbit hole without their having to go to prison. And then the related question is, can you be too close to somebody if it's a family member or a long time friend, you know, going back over decades? You're talking about going out and meeting new people. Can this work, or is there any different from people that you're very close to? And you know, we find ourselves at the two ends of the spectrum or things like that.
Okay, thank you, Larry.
That's a great question. Thank you, Larry. You know, when we think about diversity, we can think about the identity diversity, we can think about ideological diversity, like red, blue, and brave angels. The kind of diversity people don't talk about as much is relationship diversity, like what kind of different relational dynamics or patterns of relationship exist. So if we plot that on a continuum between my best friend, my wife, my mom, and then we have random people I don't know at a rally, right? In my experience, there's a time and place for every different type of relationship, including there have been times where the credible messengers oftentimes can connect with their crowd better than I can, 80, 90% of the time. But there is a certain power as an outsider if you leverage that correctly, right? One example would be like people don't have as much social pressure because there's no desire. They may not feel like they need to conform. And so they don't have to say everything that their tribe wants them to say. You can actually have a more authentic experience or interaction with them. I did a lot of work with churches, and so there was an element of me being a newcomer to a church as someone who doesn't identify as Christian. was a different kind of conversation starter than someone who was already deep in that community, right? It generates different kind of energy. There's different kinds of interests. So I think that we need everyone can play a role, whether you know someone really closely or not, in helping everyone to calm down and think a little bit more deeply about, why we believe what we do and how we act. So that's what I'll say to that.
Thank you, Ryan. Paul, go right ahead.
Yeah, just a few comments that I'd like to hear your reaction to. One word that I haven't heard here that we speak about a lot in Braver Angels is humility. Just actually being able to admit, I don't know. And I would argue that we all know a whole lot of things that we actually can't really know. So we have a sense of knowing that's pretty much based on nothing or very little. When Trump was first elected, I lost my best friend for a while over that. But we have patched things up. But I think about that, and I think when we have like an extreme reaction to an individual, in a way, we're confusing the local and the global. We're bringing in the global, where actually what we have is a situation where the local is the thing we should be paying attention to. The relationship to that person. I personally have come to the conclusion that ideology is a lever for causing great harm. Ideology allows people to do things that their conscience, I think, would not allow them to do if it wasn't for the ideology. And one of my favorite phrases is rising above your beliefs to really deal with the situation at hand. And the last thing that I think I want to say here is I just really want to make the point that psychotherapy has its own culture, and it doesn't work equally well for everybody. We're kind of like on the medical model, but we're really not. We are a tribe, and we are a self-serving tribe. I'll just leave it at that.
I think
That's
you just
awesome.
gave us a topic for another forum, Paul. So you and I will talk about that. All right, Rowan, go right ahead, please.
Hey y'all, this is my first Braver Angels event. Really grateful to be here. Mahalo to Ryan for all of the good information. I'm a trauma-informed life coach in Seattle. So it's been really, really helpful to hear about how to engage and sort of unlock and dig in with folks who might be of an extremist ideology or who might just be very different from you. Something I've been struggling with, and maybe this is just pure insecurity and like inability to just say what I believe amongst my peers, but I am definitely like in a bubble of people who are very much committed to their anger and to their dehumanization and to deification of the other, of the people they see as hateful and hating them, right? So it's been really interesting and challenging for me to navigate like sharing the kind of concepts that bring people of Braver Angels together. And Ryan, the work that you do is all the stuff that I'm interested in getting engaged in and like trying to humanize other people and understanding why people are the way they are. Most people have a good reason, right? Like even if, the behavior might not be so great. I'm just wondering if you have any advice for me to kind of like gently float the idea that maybe we are dehumanizing people, even if it comes from like fear or like understandable anger, right? I'm just wondering if you have any like language for me to be like, hey guys, maybe we don't have to punch all Nazis. Like it's not actually going to get the change we want. Yeah, I just don't have the confidence, I think, right now to feel like I am able to express that to my friends.
Yeah. Thank you, Rowan. And we should connect sometime because I'm 2 hours away from you. Talk about it more. So just being mindful of time, but I'll say a few thoughts briefly is I think for me, I guess there's two like calling people out or in or whatever you want to call it. I tend to ask people questions rather than say like, hey, I don't think we should be doing this. And the questions are usually ones I've kind of I have like a premeditated stack of different types of questions. What I'm usually trying to do is to gently inject a feeling that the outgrouping is more nuanced than you're making it out to be. there's this whole literature on the perception gap problem in politics. So the perception gap, right, is that we think that the other side has more extreme people than they actually have, or they're more violent or scary than they actually are, or they're more organized and coherent than they actually are. That's a projection that we tend to have on outgroups. And so I'll usually ask a question with that loaded implication of being like, oh, like, like I'll introduce more distinctions into the equation, right? So it would be like if someone makes a broad brush comment about like all Republicans suck or whatever, instead of just immediately calling them out, even if I would want to, I would say something like, well, are we talking, what kind are we talking about? Are we talking about this demographic? Or are we talking that? Well, what is a specific group or thing that you don't like, are we talking rural? Are we talking urban? Are we talking young people, old people? Like, what are we, and so that just insinuates that there's a little bit more complexity than people are making out. And a lot of those comments, I think, are very vague and unspecific, right? If someone said, I'm really concerned that this person is going to act this way for this reason, okay, we can have a nuanced conversation. If you say all of these people suck, because that's a huge overgeneralization. And so getting more into what are people really actually concerned about, or what are people really afraid of, or what are they really doing by saying that, right? What are they trying to signal when they're communicating in that kind of way? And a lot of times if it's nothing more just to vent and to kind of use that almost as a false form of therapy, then I've actually made groups where I'm like, okay, fine, like you can't say any of that when you're around me in this meeting, but I will make a Zoom group and it's an unhinged debate group. Come, bring all your anger, you can throw it out there and just get it out of your system. And ideological scream therapy. Okay, there we go. And I called that like a depolarization crossfire zone kind of thing. And so yeah, I think there's a few things I've tried, but it's an ongoing challenge, and I appreciate your interest in it.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like kind of some of the same strategies. Ask questions, be curious. I love that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rowan. And Michelle, I think you're going to be our last question. So
Yeah, thank you. I will make this very brief. So I am trained as a clinical psychologist. I have been thinking a lot about how I might be able to use my skills to promote compassion and understanding. And I'm so glad I came. I'm really a newbie to Braver Angels, but I definitely, I guess my two questions are, do you have any quick resources or recommendations for places where I can start or things that I could read? And then also, I loved your idea of what you did with the empathy booth. I've sort of had something like that floating in my head. And I'd love to know if you've written anything about that or if there's anything that I could learn, because I'd love to try that out.
Thank you, Michelle. Email me. So I have a training on how to do the empathy booth. We can talk later if Brave Angels people are interested in how to do that and set one up. And then I also have a bunch of articles on Substack that I wrote under Cure. So I guess I'll give the link to someone, Paige or Marybeth or whatever, and then we can disseminate all of the resources after this.
Okay, that's terrific. And where would I find your email?
what we might be able to do, do you want to talk about that, Ryan, after the meeting? And we can always send it out to the membership. So because if you registered and are here, which you obviously are, then you'll get our emails. So
let's put mine in the chat. First name, last name @gmail.com.
There you go. If you got it in there, even better. Okay.
Thank you
very
much.
There you go.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to step in because it is time to wrap up. I've got a couple of things. First off, I want to thank you, Ryan, for an incredible meeting. We may have to get you back in again before too much longer.
Is that a threat, Linda?
Yeah.
Thank you. Everyone was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I was enthralled. I think this is one of the best meetings we've managed so far. So, and welcome to all the new people that are here. Always good to see familiar faces. Thank you to Paige and to Mary Beth, who helped to make sure this whole thing doesn't crash and burn, and that spent so much time and effort getting the word out and so forth. Thanks to Paul Norris, Xandra Keeg, and I co-moderate this. So grateful for all the input there. I want to let you know that our next meeting is going to be on the 4th Friday in March. We changed it a little bit. So it's going to be the 4th Friday in March, March 28th, and at this same time. And our topic is therapy with gun owners. We're going to talk about working with people who have firearms. So certainly hope that you will be there. Before we do wrap up, Ryan, did you have any last words? Anything you wanted to say before we do sign off?
Yes, I just want to thank everyone so much for being here today, for your attention and participation and excellent questions and insights. And I feel really inspired by all of you and inspired by the energy and the interest here. And sometimes I think everyone has felt the feeling of like pushing a boulder up a hill, you know, with this kind of work. And you all remind me to keep going and keep trying. So love you all very much. And thank you very much for coming today.